It's my favorite week of the year. The Forbes Future of Work 50 just came out. Just kidding. My favorite week of the year is whichever one I get to spend in some strange exotic country with hiking boots and a hangover. But seriously, the list did just come out, and when I read it, one name jumped out at me, or more specifically, one job title, and that would be Head of Remote. And the person on the list was this guy. Now, I don't know Darren personally, but I followed his work for a while. And when I say he's prolific, I mean he literally holds the world record for most blog posts written by one person ever. So to see his name on the list is really kind of cool, but it got me thinking, what does a head of remote actually do? How many companies have one of those? How many companies should have one of those? And perhaps most importantly, why is there only one head of remote sitting on that Forbes list, all at a table by himself? You're watching Out of Office, the least boring remote work news source on the planet. I'm your host, Andrew Allen. Now let's dive back into this week's topic. Now, if you look up the title Head of Remote, you'll find out pretty quickly that it was coined by this guy. Oh, yeah, that's Darren again. God, he's prolific. What I didn't mention before is that he actually works for GitLab, which likes to call itself the world's largest all-remote company. Although I noticed they've been watering that line down a lot recently, so maybe it's not true anymore. But what we do know is that as head of remote for GitLab, Darren's put together some really awesome resources, like GitLab's famous remote playbook that's had like 150,000 downloads, and actually a second playbook which is all about the job. So he's had a ton of traction out of this. You might have seen some of these articles in the past. Now, I've read both playbooks and all the articles I could find, and here's how I would summarize it. Number 1, a head of remote decouples business results from physical geography. I actually love that way of describing it, but it is a little opaque. Essentially, it's a trick that we've seen before from the C-suite, where you take something quite important and you just make it somebody's whole job. Like an internal consultant who navigates cross-functional waters to avoid expensive miscommunications and mistakes. We've seen this before with everything from Chief Diversity Officer to Chief Sustainability Officer and even Chief Happiness Officer, which, yes, is an actual job title, as over 100 pages of people on LinkedIn who hold it can attest. So in the case of a Chief Remote Officer, responsibilities include things like setting expectations on working hours and asynchronous tools to bridging the gap between cross-functional teams and managers, like a kind of Switzerland. And then they also create handbooks and things that make it easier for people working remotely to get up and running and answer the questions that they might have when the person they need to speak to is on the other side of the world fast asleep. And that brings us to number 2. According to data that LinkedIn provided to Forbes, there's been a 60% increase in job titles related to the future of work, and a 304% spike in titles that reference hybrid work since the pandemic began. And you've probably seen lots of these titles, like Hybrid Workplace Flexibility Lead, Director of Hybrid Working, Flexible Workspace Operations Manager, and Vice President Employee Engagement and Flexible Work. Those are all real job titles, by the way. Don't they just roll off the tongue? Okay, so how about number 3? This is kind of the thesis statement, right? Our mate Darren has put together a ton of insights, research, and guidance, which shows that pretty much any large company can improve their business results when they make it someone's whole job to empower great collaboration between employees and teams who just aren't in the same room every day. But the word I'm hearing on the street is that a lot of these corporations think once they've hired a head of remote, it's job done, which is basically the same thing as joining a gym and then expecting a six-pack to form on the spot. So they hire this person, but then aren't willing to change the way they do stuff. For example, reducing meetings, prioritizing asynchronous working, and dropping policies that don't work, like forcing everyone to be in the office for 3 days a week. I've spoken to a few heads of remote who shall remain nameless, and they all tell me they basically have to spend all their time convincing executives to listen to the data. And then being forced to roll out and defend lame duck hybrid policies and stupid rules that they already know aren't gonna work. And perhaps that's why there's only one head of remote on the Forbes list, sitting there at that table all alone. Too often, it seems to be lip service, a role which most companies desperately need, but then refuse to give any power. But don't lose heart. Remember, that's pretty much what they did with technology roles back in the 80s. So many companies thought that they didn't need a website, and then they thought that they didn't need an online purchase pack, and then they thought they didn't need customer service on social media, and we all know how that ended. The future always rolls in like an avalanche, no matter who resists it. and the smart people are the ones who figure out how to ride it. So my message to you is this. If you don't think your company needs a head of remote, you're probably wrong. If you're thinking about becoming a head of remote, go for it. But don't be a wallflower. Demand that you're actually empowered to make real changes. And if your company has just hired a head of remote, listen to them. Give them actual power, because if you don't, it'll probably cost your business a lot more in the long run. I'm Andrew Allen, and the future of work is out of office. Oh, by the way, Darren, if you're watching this, consider this your open invitation to join me on an episode of Out of Office anytime you want. Maybe we can find another Guinness record to break. Most heads of remote in a room together, perhaps, or most new job titles coined in a single day. Most Guinness World Records held by a head of remote. Yeah, those aren't very good, are they? Scratch that. Well, I'll see you next week. Oh, what about most silly animations ever used on a single podcast episode? Yeah, I kind of like that one.